Hello, everyone on the stream. Welcome. Today we are doing a Discord discussion of the first three Pavement albums. And if I hop on over here, there we go. Okay, you guys are live. Say hello to the stream, everyone.
Hola.
Hola.
What's up?
So far we only have two people here. We might have more, and I think more were supposed to show up. But if not, then it's fine. Sometimes we have really small discussions, and it's a lot of fun. So today we will be covering Slanted, Crooked, and Wowee, first three Pavement albums, and then hopefully be able to get the rest in a second session. And yeah, I think we'll just start right on in. This is my first time doing this as a live stream rather than an edited video, so I apologize if anyone's watching and it's all clunky. But let's see here. So I'm going to go to this screen here. Boom. Okay, so we'll start with Slanted. And I'll just go track by track and kind of give my thoughts, and then I'll let the other guys here say what they want to say. Yeah, let's go. Boom. Here are my ratings. And I'll go ahead and post these in the chat so that the guys can see it as well if they're not watching the stream. So interestingly enough, as I was doing this, going back and looking at all the songs and seeing if my ratings changed, because I hadn't rated every song on its own prior to this. I just rated the albums. My album ratings for these three albums actually stayed the same. I have wildly inconsistent feelings on all of these first three Pavement albums. I think some songs are great, if not amazing, and other songs I'm just like, I don't ever want to listen to this again. So as you guys can see here on the screen, these are my ratings for Slanted, and I'll just go track by track and kind of give my thoughts on each one. So Summer Babe, I think, is kind of compositionally boring, but the playing is sort of fun. I have that at a 3 out of 5. Trigger Cut, I think, is a great little lo-fi rock tune, has nice riffs, super catchy melodies, and I think it's this album's gold sounds. I think it just kind of has that really catchy appeal, and I have that at a 4. No Life, Singed Her, whatever. It's just kind of a crazy rock interlude. It doesn't really do anything for me. I have that at a 1.5. In the Mouth of Desert is cool. It kind of feels like it's always climbing chord-wise. It's not necessarily a highlight for me, though, but I have that at a 3.5. Conduit for Sale, I'm trying to love this track, but I just think it's okay. It doesn't really do anything for me. It's fun, though. I have that at 2.5. Zurich is Stained is possibly my favorite Pavement song. I'm not sure yet. I'll have to see once we do the part 2, because I don't remember every single track. But of these three albums, this is my favorite song so far. I love the twangy, detuned sound of this, the great guitar arrangement and great lyrics. And I actually have that at a 5. I have like no issues with it at all. Chesley's Little Wrists, this track bogs me down, but I think it's funny in its own way, and I have that at a 2.5. Loretta Scars is much like Summer Babe. It just feels basic and kind of lacks oomph, and I have that at the same rating. Here, I think, is maybe a little too simple / indie rock for like this typically eccentric band, but Malkmus's lyrics always carry any song that they write. It just has a kind of pathos that just feels warm, and I have that at a 4.5, so I like that one. Two States, Canberg, I don't know, man. I can't do it. 1.5 on that one. Perfume V is a bit abrasive, but has a nice chorus. It's a 3. Fame Thrower is sort of silly and odd. I wouldn't seek this out, but it's a little fun sometimes, and I have that actually at a 3.5. Jackals is a very monotone track. It has a few interesting ideas, but it doesn't really hold its own weight very well. I have that at a 2.5. Then the last one, Our Singer, just feels extremely bland and uninteresting. I don't really get it. It's very much like a plateau the whole time, and I have that at a 2. So as you guys could see, my ratings are just wildly all over the place, and that's not really going to change for really any of these albums. But that's fine. So I guess we'll start with Shiftless. What do you think of Slanted?
Yeah, like I like a lot of Slanted based on its ethos mostly and just like its sensibilities. Like it very much indie rock personified from a band, especially for the 90s. The thing about it is, I've had this discussion with all of them a couple of times where this album to me feels like a really glorified demo session, and it works in that sort of field of it, but I don't ever feel like it's a real album because it just doesn't feel structured enough for it.
Sure.
And like you said about like them being kind of all over the place, like both your ratings. I feel like that's just Pavement in general, both a strength and a weakness for them. I like them being messy, but in this case, I feel like the messiness is not inherently them willfully trying to be that way as much as they just don't know how to really control themselves in any real capacity.
Hmm.
So the songs feel like everywhere, and they're just going like, "We have an idea, we'll see where this goes, and we'll stop when we feel like stopping." Like I don't feel like there's any real forethought beyond that.
I agree.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, my favorite songs off here are probably the slower songs because I think if they take from Sonic Youth, one of their best attributes from taking from them is understanding how to make a slow, moody, melodic sensibility. And they don't mess with timbres nearly as much, but they do have that understanding of how to keep a groove and how to keep a sort of meditative stance with them. And I really appreciate that. And that's why I prefer the next record like way more over because I feel like that sense of melody put more in the forefront. But here I think there's a good it's a good stepping stone, but I don't think I just feel like it's a little too hyped for what it is. Like it's a good snapshot of the era, but I don't feel like I really ever want to go back to it because I just feel like there's too much that they would go on later on to make more interesting, more innovative, and just actually more listenable.
yeah, I agree with that. I don't quite see the like why I don't understand why this album in particular is. I mean, I guess I could see why it's so highly regarded as like a lo-fi from a lo-fi standpoint, but from a Pavement standpoint, I don't think it's their strongest set of songs.
No, me neither.
Yeah,
In some ways, I can see it their weakest albums, and I don't, and that's because I like latter day Pavement a lot. Not even though it's not as adventurous, but I do think that their songwriting is clearly matured in a very interesting way, as opposed to here. Like the biggest selling points is the kind of production and also the energy behind the tracks. But you can get that off of punk rock easily. So to me, there's not that much feeling of needing to go back here, except hearing some of these songs in their more like primitive ways.
sure, sure. Boss, what do you think of this?
Okay, so I'm gonna preface this with I love Pavement, they're one of my favorite bands, but this is probably the one I return to the least.
Hmm.
Like I like a lot of songs on this, but there's a lot that I'm just like, I don't have to hear these all the time. My top tracks are probably Summer Babe, Trigger Cut, In the Mouth of Desert, Conduit for Sale, uh, and then probably Jackals. The rest of it, the album sort of ranges, in my opinion, to good to like just sort of experimentation that's not really needed. I guess not really needed because they were sort of doing stuff like this before the album came out. They had a few EPs that they compiled into Westing by Musket and Sextant,
Hmm.
which is just like uh, compared to I don't know. It's just weird experimentation, like noise stuff, and some tracks are just unlistenable in those first few EPs. But also, this album I'm pretty sure is just Malcolmus, Spiral Stairs, and Gary Young. It doesn't have Bob Nastanovich or Mike Ebold on it.
Hmm.
And I don't really understand why this is like one of the greatest albums of all time, anything like that. It's good, um, but I don't understand, especially when the next album is definitely one of the best albums of all time. But it's it's just a it's just a it's good for like lo-fi music, but there's definitely other lo-fi music that I would prefer to listen to over this.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Crooked is not talked about, or at least not like in the spotlight as much as Slanted is. And yeah, I'm surprised we're all in agreement on that. I thought I was the only one where I'm like, I feel like they did like better, like even on the next album, but like Slanted just gets all the love and Crooked is like out in the rain, so to speak.
Well, by I mean, this came out in 91, 92. Like, there's tons of other uh noise rock stuff that you could be listening to that already would have come out. Like, this doesn't predate anything. Like, Dinosaur Jr. and Sonic Youth and Guided by Voices were already around
Yeah.
at various degrees. Like, I don't understand why everybody points to this. Like, it's a good album, but it's just not. I don't know. I think part of it is because Pavement always had that like slacker ethos around them, even if I don't think that really fits their sound at all. Like, it's more of their mentality, but not really their even mentality when making music. They just sort of did what they want, and people called them slackers.
Yeah, I can see that comparison, and I also agree that they don't really. It's somewhere between like stoner and punk, you know, as far as like not giving a crap about how they do things. But yeah, I agree. Same thing on this album. Um, Big Tony, if you're here, are you just listening or are you in the chat? Just let me know. And if you're just in the chat or have anything to say, okay, perfect. So I suppose if does anyone have anything else to say on this at all? If not, then we'll just move on to the next thing.
Real quickly, I see someone in the YouTube chat talking about the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'd say early Pavement sounds a little bit like the fall, but mainly the main thing that comes up when you talk about both bands is that the singer from the fall, Marky Smith, said that Pavement didn't have an original idea in their heads, and that they were just copying directly from the fall.
I don't think I've heard really anything from the fall, so I don't even know. Like, do they sound that similar?
A little bit. They just sort of have this like manic. The fall has this like manic punk energy, and like sort of they just also do what they want. Like, it's hard to describe why they sound similar, but if you heard it you'd be like, yeah, this sounds a little bit like, oh yeah, Pavement sounds a little bit like the fall, or the fall sounds a little bit like Pavement.
But like, I mean, Pavement does a lot of different things, though. Like they do a lot of different like dynamics in their music. Some like you'll have a slow song, and then the next one will just be like insane punky, and then like something weird after that.
Yeah, definitely like the weird punk stuff is probably more in comparison.
Mhm.
Like Chelsea's Little Wrists, uh, probably like Fame Thrower, stuff like that. Definitely Conduit for Sale. Conduit for Sale could be the fall song,
Interesting.
to put that into perspective. That just sort of like, but it's hard to nail that sound.
That's fair. Okay, well, I suppose we'll move on to Crooked. We're making good time here. So anyway, so that was 92. Next album, Crooked Rain. Oh, also, I made little like cover things and I haven't turned them on. There we go. Boom. So that way people know what we're talking about. Yeah, Crooked Rain was 94. I prefer this album slightly more. I think it has more consistency to it. There's still a few tracks I think are duds, but it's not nearly as wildly all over the place as Slanted for me. So here are my Crooked ratings. I have the album at about a 3.5 ish. It might be a 4 on a good day. So track by track here. Silence Kit. It's a nice kind of send up to Every Day by Buddy Holly. It's a very similar melody. And they're leaning more into like an approachable indie rock material here, and it's showing right out of the gate. I have that at a 3.5. Also at a 3.5, I have Elevate Me Later. It's kind of the in the mouth of desert of this album, steadily rising musical motif, but I think it's a bit better than the previous album's entry. Stop Breathing, not a bad track, but feels a little uninspired at times. Cool dissonance in the riffs, though. I have that at a 3. Cut Your Hair. You know what? This song is just fine. It's just fine. There's better singles on this album, though. I put Cut Your Hair at a 3.5, actually. New Work Wilder. Cool noir kind of vibe on this one. Very sleek and sexy. It's not a favorite, but I think it's solid. I have that at a 3. Unfair is one of the first really aggressive Pavement tracks. I think there's a fun energy on this one. I actually like it quite a bit. I have that at 3.5. Gold Sounds, I think, is just one of the best indie rock singles of the 90s. All of Pavement's strengths are on display here. Interesting lyrics, composition, phrasing, dynamics, and playing. It's just really good. I have that at a 4.5. 5 minus 4 equals Unity. It's a really odd interlude track, but it's fine. That's a 2.5. Range Life, I think, is a great alt-country tinged indie rock track. This and Gold Sounds are obviously the top tracks here, in my opinion. That's also at a 4.5. Heaven is a Truck. No energy on this one. It just feels like a demo that somehow made it to the album track listing. I have that at a 2. And then at a 1, I have Hit the Plane Down. Canberg. No, that's a bad Canberg. Fillmore Jive, cool climactic outro. It almost feels like a Galaxy 500 track that's... I don't know how I came up with this description. It feels like a Galaxy 500 track that's been beaten up and forced to walk home. And I have that at a 4 out of 5. But yeah, I think this is much more consistent. Heaven is a Truck and Hit the Plane Down are really the only two that I just don't like very much at all. But the rest all have their strengths, and there's more really good, solid material here. So those are my thoughts on Crooked Rain, Crooked Rain. Shiftless, what do you think of this one?
Yeah, like this is probably my favorite Pavement album. Like it'll be in competition with this and Wowee. And they both share a lot of the same things for me of just being very melodic and very adventurous at the same time. Like with Wowee, you get way more of that adventureness and just like everywhere sensibility. But here, I love that Pavement's willing to be so accessible and let the songs breathe and let them like exist in their own realm and not try to be super contrived with it. And it really works out in the lyrical department because I feel like so many of these songs are very much like realized on that spectrum, and the whole band dynamic works so well.
Yeah.
Because like you said that they were like stoner and punk, and I feel like that very much what got them that slacker sensibility. It's like these songs are remarkably slow, and the reason for that is that drumming. Like there's this slow pounding that gives all these songs some weight behind them, even if they're just soft and melodic. And because of that, it kind of always makes it feel like you're just plodding along in a very joyous way. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how I can best describe this album. It's like it's so happy being its weird, messed up self that you kind of have to abide to it a little bit just for being so outwardly quirky, but not in any obnoxious way. Like, and the singles here were amazing. Like, the idea of Gold Sounds and Range Life not being bigger for their era is kind of a little sad
Yeah.
when I think about it, because I'm just thinking like '94 was a big year of music, so I get the competition, but it's a little saddening. Also, I completely agree. Hit the Plane Down is so goddamn awful. Like I want to love a good portion of Scott's contributions, but they always feel so weak in comparison.
They get better,
And
but at the beginning it was rough, man.
yeah, and it leads to their character as a band, but I just can't get behind it. Though I completely disagree with Heaven as a Truck. I think it's a perfect like 180 from Range Life because I
Mm.
love this sort of slow down, sleepy, 3 o'clock in the morning driving type of feel of it because it just feels like I'm just going home after a long night out with friends and just like looking at the scenery pass by while in a car. Yeah,
That's a fair
it's
comparison, or a fair point, because I think in the album context it does fit quite well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like been one of my favorite albums from them, and I think it's deservedly like one of the best albums of the '90s. I think it deserves way more acclaim than something like Slanted does. So I always like am willing to applaud it for what it is.
I think of
That's my piece.
Yeah, I think it of these three, I think it flows the best personally. I think Wowee, just because of its size, has so many wild shifts and like chances for duds or hits that I think that this is a nice, a tighter set of tracks and possibly one of their best flowing albums.
I completely agree. But then Wowee is trying to be like the White Album.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's trying to be woefully inconsistent, and this is like we can make the comparison with their later albums when we do that discussion. But I do think that this and those albums, especially something like Terror Twilight, like they're making that mainstream like conversation, and I don't think they ever sell out doing it. But it is something very interesting to hear coming from a incredibly creative band. It's
Mhm.
it's like the Velvet Underground. It's like when you see a weirdo band try to make something commercially appealing and do it right, it is kind of striking to go like, oh, you could have succeeded if you really, really wanted to.
Yeah, and like these commercially like Gold Sounds and Range Life are very approachable, but there's still plenty of stuff on this album that's like weird and like has a little bit of friction when you listen to it as opposed to like I even and when I reacted to Good News by Modest Mouse, it's like obviously Float On is very approachable, but there's like weird Tom Waits songs like in the middle of that album. So like even when like there are bands who just completely sell out and will go like with that mainstream sound, but there are a few where they just like they lean on that with the singles, but then the rest of the album is still has that funk of the band all over it.
I get that.
Yeah,
I feel like that what was it? That PJ Harvey's album that I put on for you guys was pretty much that kind of thing. But then again, you don't have the other albums as like a comparative note.
exactly. Yeah, and I've heard that after I did um, that album I reacted to recently, To Bring You My Love. Everyone was like, all of her albums sound like completely different. So don't try to like figure out how she sounds just from this. I'm like, all right, fair enough. So, Boss, what do you think of Crooked Rain, Crooked Rain?
This is one of my favorite albums of all time. This is one
OMG,
of the best. This is one of the best albums of the '90s.
that's
I
fair.
I I forgot. I was gonna go off on a few tangents about like background information. Mainly, this album doesn't have Gary Young on it because he was kicked out of the band for being pretty much a crazy person.
Oh no.
Their live, he would just do a bunch of like stuff during their live shows. Like he'd get absolutely wasted drunk and just do like handstands and hand out like vegetables to audience members.
That's awesome.
And he was like him and like Malcolmus were sort of like two different sides of the same coin for what like Pavement represented, I think.
Hmm.
With Malcolmus, although having like that experimental tendency to be more of like a singer songwriter guy, and Gary Young to just be like all experimentation, just like manic energy.
Hmm.
Um,
And,
so yeah,
and you said
Team West.
you said he was not on this album.
No, he was kicked out. I think I wish I remember the full story for that, but I want to say that he was friends with like Bob Nastanovich, and I think Bob Nastanovich kicked him out, and because the whole band was in agreement that they couldn't continue with Gary Young, so instead Steve West, who I think is a underrated drummer, or he's on this, and I think he fits the what Pavement was doing right now in '94 and '93 a lot better. Also, Pavement were heavily, or maybe just Malcolmus, but you can kind of hear it in their sound. They were heavily inspired by REM, who they made a little track about on in '93 called "Unseen Power of the Picket Fence," which was on the No Alternative compilation.
Hmm.
But it's weird because some of that early like it's hard to compare the two because I always hear like, oh yeah, they Pavement loved REM, but it's like I can't really hear the influence as much, especially because REM just did a lot in between '83 to at this point, 94, Monster came out, which sounds completely different than any other REM stuff. 94 was just a weird year. Uh, for a lot of rock bands. I think this album, Crooked Rain would have made more sense coming out in like 92 or 93, because a bunch of bands were changing their sound. Like Sonic Youth made experimental Jet Set, Trash, and No Star, which doesn't really sound like a 90s Sonic Youth album. And yeah, just a bunch of like weird, like if you focus in on individual 90s bands, it's weird to see their growth from like 91 to 94.
Do you think, I mean, I haven't heard very much REM at all, so I can't, that's what kind of why I'm asking you. Do you think maybe like later Pavement is better compared to REM? Because I feel like later Pavement is when they kind of mellowed out and got maybe a bit like janglier.
Yeah, definitely like Bright in the Corners is their and Terror Twilight, I think are more more REM sounding Pavement albums.
Sure.
But REM was like pretty straightforward. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean like this level of experimentation could, again, by Pavement, could be more compared to like Sonic Youth or The Fall,
right,
than REM. But on to the actual album. There's a bunch of like little rants and stuff I needed to touch on.
It's all good. We got time. Amazing.
Silence Kid. I don't know which is the title. I've heard them called both. That's an amazing opener, and I think is a great introduction to the slightly different sound that Pavement were going for. Because I think this is, besides like one or two outliers, is an extremely consistent 90s like alt rock, lo-fi album. I think the only track, because any of these tracks are just like amazing. I'd say that 5 Minus 4 = Unity is underrated, but obviously it's like a weird interlude. I don't know if it ends or starts a side. That's what I'd assume it does. And then Hit the Plane Down is like a send up to like Devo and other like new wave, like weird experimental new wave artists. That is not Scott Canberg's or Spiral Stairs' best at all. It's I don't know. I feel like, because on the next album, the next 3 albums, Scott Canberg made like absolutely amazing Pavement songs, and then his first 2 contributions, or his contributions on the first 2 albums,
so it's this
just are weird. It's weird. It's weird seeing how he like changed over completely, like a complete 180.
It looks like
over to.
Sorry to interrupt. It looks like it's the second one on this B side.
That's I don't know. It just feels like it should start aside.
Yeah,
it's like it's a weird interlude thing.
Yeah,
it's great. I love it. There's a version on the deluxe edition of Crooked Rain where it has vocals. There's a bunch of just I think they were even trying out. There's actually a version on the deluxe of this album it's Grounded. It's a 94 version of Grounded. Like they were trying out a bunch of stuff that would go on Wowee, but it sounds completely different.
Interesting.
Obviously, I feel like the sound for Wowee is way more like just sort of like, we didn't want like, I guess I'll talk about it in a minute, but I think Wowee Zowee is just like, oh yeah, we didn't want any of this like success, pretty much. We didn't want anything that came with this, because they were touring with like Sonic Youth and Nirvana and Mudhoney, and they were doing way better than they ever were before. And then Wowee Zowee is just like a big middle finger to like everything in the music business, which is kind of what Cut Your Hair is about.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's cool. It's almost like their Pinkerton or their Morrissey, a complete Morrissey.
Just a complete Morrissey move.
Yeah.
I kind of get it.
Yeah. Just a middle finger to the music industry. Did you say what your favorite tracks were?
Uh, genuinely any of them. My top three would probably be in no order. Elevate Me Later, uh, Stop Breathing, and either of the singles of either Cut Your Hair or Range of Life.
Hmm.
But I love it.
Elevate Me Later. I really love that guitar tone on it. It's very, very unique. Very good. All right. Well, I suppose that's it for that then. We'll move on. Making really good time here. I don't know where all the rest of our boys are. They're not here. I think Twig said he was going to be here, but he's just gone. All right. So the next album, the last one we'll be covering today, is going to be Wowee Zowee, and came out the next year, 95. Slightly longer album, shorter songs though, 18 tracks, but we only have 55 minutes here. I also have this at a 3.5. It's kind of like a stretched out Crooked Rain for me, where it's like the highs on this aren't as high for me as they were on Crooked, but the lows aren't necessarily always as low either. So here are my ratings, and I will go track by track on this. I have the album at 3.5, and let's see, one moment. So We Dance is possibly my favorite song on the album. I don't know. I have it at a 4, but it might be like a 4.25 maybe for me. I think it's a really cool departure for Pavement sound right out of the gate. It's a very nice guitar piano interplay on this. Rattled by the Rush is an alright track. The chorus is okay, but the rest just feels a bit dull to me. I have that at a 3. Blackout is a fine track. It's just a bit short and it doesn't explore much. I also have that at a 3. Brink's Job, they may have the money, but they don't have my heart on this track. It's just one of those silly oddball Pavement tracks that doesn't do anything for me. I have that at a 2. Grounded, nice bit of like lo-fi stoner tinged rock on this, slow and steady and an enjoyable listen. That's a 3.5. Serpentine Pad, a little punky number. It's an alright riff, but nothing super memorable for me. 2.5 on that. Motion Suggests is a nice calm track. I enjoy these type of melancholy tracks from Pavement. I have that at 3.5. Father to a Sister of Thought, pleasant alt-country track with nice steel guitar. I have that at 3. Extradition is an odd one, but a fun one. Just kind of does whatever the hell it feels like. I also have that at a 3. Best Friend's Arm, really fun riff on this one. Like it a lot. One of my more favorite manic Pavement tracks, which are sort of few and far between for me. I have that at 3.5. Grave Architecture, my other favorite on the album, is just a cool track. Great riff, great sound, nice vocals. I have that at a 4. AT&T is sort of bland, one-off type indie rock track, kind of skippable for me as far as like Pavement standards go. I have that at a 2.5. Flux equals Rad. Fun little aggressive riff with fun vocals. It's nothing amazing, but it's over quick. It's at a 3. Fight This Generation. The cello is a nice addition here, and the song transitions really well from the melancholy opening to the more brooding later half. I have that at a 4. Kennel District, finally an alright Canberg track. I think there might be ones I like more on the later albums, but this one's okay, not great, just okay. Have that at 2.5. Pueblo, verses are a bit boring, but I love that chorus riff and it climaxes nicely into the ending. That's a 3.5. Half a Canyon, the acceleration into that like Stereolab-esque guitar at about 3 minutes is nice. It's kind of a cool rock climax type of track, but it just feels a bit too messy to come back to often. That's at a 3. And then Western Homes, well, at least Kennel District was okay, I suppose. I have that at a 2. But yeah, it's like I said, a less concentrated version of Crooked. The highs aren't as high and the lows aren't as low for me. And the comparison to it being their White Album, I think, was very apt. I agree with that quite a bit. So, Shiftless, what do you think of Wowee Zowee?
Yeah, Wowie's like it and Crooked, depending on the day, could kind of change. More times than not, I'll be for Crooked Rain just because I prefer it being more compact and more, I think, melodically forward with itself. But it's kind of hard to not like the sensibility of Wowie a lot because
Mm-hmm.
it's so fun. Like it relishes in itself so easily. And I do find it to be kind of a fun joke that they started with the prettiest song off the album because it's so refined. It's almost like a David Bowie track off of like Hunky Dory.
Yeah.
Like it's so pretty, and then something like Rattled by the Rush and Grounded. Like I love the way they're playing with dynamics in such an incredibly wide way. I feel like as a band musically, this is probably their best album because they're just going every direction possible
Yeah.
and just making their contrasting sort of sensibilities really work on that end. And like I love something like Best Friend's Arm, where I don't know a goddamn word being said, but I'm just having a good time going through it, and just that riff. It's just you could almost see it in like a cartoon or something,
Yeah.
like just having that energy. So I really like going through this album every once in a while, not in full too much because it's draining going through that. But it is fun to just go through it and go cherry pick and see it because it's a lot of interesting little things happening. Like AT&T, I like a lot just because I just don't know why the melody is very catchy, even though it's just nonsensical as hell. And like I don't know, it's a very charming album, and I always find it funny that Malcolm kind of thought this was going to be Pavement's breakthrough in some ways. He thought that this was their most like appealing album, and he says like a lot of that judgment probably was kind of clouded by how much weed he was smoking at that point. Which hearing the album, I'm like, yeah, that kind of that kind of feels like the mentality of this because it just doesn't feel like anything's really taken in any capacity very seriously, but
Yeah.
it's very chilled out with it. Also, bringing up Weezer back there, because I'm pretty sure you're aware of like the beef that a lot of people have with Weezer and Pavement,
No, actually.
right? Okay, this was more prevalent in the '90s, and it still kind of carried on to this day. Was the idea that Weezer were viewed as like a commercialized version of Pavement, and that they kind of took that sound and that sort of outsider mentality and made it mainstream, and then popularized it to everyone else. And I always kind of found that weird because I kind of see it and I kind of don't. Like something in Pinkerton, I'm like, okay, Pinkerton feels like it could have been a Pavement album in some ways, like a
Sure.
Slanted and Enchanted, but I don't see that same sense of indie like lo-fi sensibilities coming off of Weezer as much. And like that outsider mentality, I'm like, Weezer were being nerds. These
Yes.
guys were being just goofballs.
Exactly.
And like it's completely different because it's not I don't know. One of them's very endearing in a sort of underdog way. One of them's endearing in a oh you're such a fuck up type of way, you know?
Yeah, I can see like maybe the stylistic comparisons a little bit, but yeah, it's an absurd. It's kind of an absurd comparison to have like intrinsically in like what they were like. Is the thing that people were claiming that Weezer was trying to basically distill Pavement down to something more approachable? Is that what they're saying?
That was a lot of the generalized consensus from it because they felt it was very much that. And I find it interesting being that that came out right when both Crooked Rain and the Blue album came out. And I'm like, I could understand it maybe once Pinkerton comes out, but just for hearing that sensibility in the Blue album, I'm like, they're way more easier like comparison to make with other bands and going with Pavement straight up.
Yeah, yeah. I don't really see that at all. I didn't know that was a thing. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like Malcolm has had his statement saying that he felt that that was something of agreement on his end that he felt like was based in reality that Weezer probably took for them. But then again, I don't know. Malcolmus had his beef in the last album with Stone Temple Pilots and Smashing Pumpkins. So it's not like he's the most reasonable guy when it comes to talking to other musicians.
That's fair. That's fair. Anything else to say on Wowee?
Uh, I feel like the other albums after this are great. Like they have their really good moments, and I think probably some of the best singles coming off of them.
Mm.
Clearly,
Hmm.
especially something like Major Leagues or
Love Major Leagues.
yeah, yeah. I'm forgetting one of the other Spit on a Stranger.
Hmm.
Like I love that like guitar line so much.
Oh yeah.
But it as good as those albums are, this is the last time I feel like Pavement tried to push themselves as much as being something of a pure musical experimentation. And then after that, they kind of want to find a new path for themselves that they're not entirely sure of where to go.
Yeah.
And so I think this is a good ending point of one aspect of their career that I'm like I like the next one, but I do think that there was something magical here that not anyone else could have really captured.
Fair enough. I agree. Cool. Boss. Wowie Zowie. Go.
This is another really good 90s alt rock album, but they decided to throw everything at the wall pretty much and
Yeah.
see what works, see what doesn't. But I still think this is just like a huge middle finger to like everyone. Like the fans, the old fans, the new fans, the record executives, the music industry, like everyone. And because again, they just did what they wanted. That's what Pavement was pretty much always for. It's a weird transitional record between Crooked Rain and Right in the Corners, because I think you have the last little remnants of like weird experimentation and just like uh kind of like some punk stuff going on, and then with something like Kennel District, which I feel like Kennel District could have been. It's one of my favorite Pavement songs, but I think it could have been like a hit, or at least a minor hit, compared to the actual singles on this album. You know, Rattled by the Rush, Father to a Sister of Thought. I think Malcolmus thought, because the big thing is that him, and I think a lot of the band were uh, smoking a ton of pot. I think mainly him, and he said that like every song could have been like a number one hit on this album. He was also listening to a lot of Can. Like he was.
Weed and
I
can is
forget
not
what
the
Can
best
album it
combination.
was. There was some Can album he'd like listen to every night before he went to bed, or like while he slept. And the only Can influenced track on here is probably Pueblo, which is just this. I always think Pueblo's. I think it's Pueblo. No, it's Half a Canyon. I think Half a Canyon. It's one of those two. I get those two mixed up.
Half a Canyon is like the really long, sprawling one. It feels a little bit more like jammy, like Can. That might be
Because
it.
the rest of it again is just all over the place.
Hmm.
Uh, Apparently I did a little bit of research on like uh aspects of this album. I'm pretty sure that, well, according to this, it says that Malcolmus he picked the track order for the album because normally Canberg would, and that they had 20 songs, so they were thinking about putting it all on the album. I don't know what the other two songs were that didn't fit the album, because on a vinyl version of this, it's only three sides. It doesn't go to the fourth side. It's a double album, but it's not all four sides,
Oh, that's weird.
which which I can only think of like one or two other albums like ever really doing. Also, Alex, are you familiar with the Silver Jews at all?
That was his other project after Pavement, right?
Uh,
Or during
no, well,
Pavement?
kind of. Yeah, during Pavement, I think at least Malcolmus and Nastanovich were doing stuff with I think his name's David Burnham, something like that. And David Burnham was the main like creative force behind Silver Jews, but he was friends with Malcolmus. So I think Malcolmus and Bob Nastanovich are on the first like one or two Silver Jews albums.
I know a lot of people have been wanting me to do American Water.
Yeah, I think you would like. I think you might like Silver Jews a little bit more than you would like Pavement.
Does it sound like, because it says it's like a bit of alt country and Americana. Does it like sound kind of like Pavement's country stuff?
A little bit, but it's way more like easy go. It's way more what Malcolmus would kind of end up doing with his solo albums,
Okay.
which I think you should also kind of check out. The one that he did immediately after Pavement just sounds like Pavement remnants,
Hmm. The
and I'm
self-titled
assuming some
one
of
from
that.
like 2001 or whatever it was.
Yeah, but like I said, this album's just that's the main thing. This album's just all over the place. There's some great moments. Uh, Rattled by the Rush, Grounded, Fight This Generation, Kennel District, Grave Architecture. Uh, I'd say that Blackout, to say what I was talking about earlier with REM, I think Blackout is a kind of REM sounding song,
Hmm.
a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Let me try to think what else. But yeah, I have some stuff to say about the art for this. Apparently, they picked. Malcolmus was looking through a cover of art by, or like a bunch of different things of art by, I think his name's Steve Keen,
Mm-hmm.
and then this is the one that they ended up on. I think he said it reminded him of some other album cover. The font, the speech bubble thing from like the actual like Pavement question mark Wowee Zowee reminds me of the cover of We're Only in It for the Money by Frank Zappa, and I have no idea if Pavement was influenced by Zappa. That's just what it like reminds me of.
I'm gonna go look at that right now.
I'll send some of that stuff in a minute. But
Okay.
yeah, this let's see here. Um yeah, Malcolmus is also, it says he was keen to include songs that were considered B-sides by the band. So I think he just went with like whatever, pretty much. And you can totally sense that.
Sure.
And I didn't think a lot of, again, the 90s are uh, changing. Like the ground that the ground they were once standing on was just like moving and shifting. But instead of following trends or making another Crooked Rain, they decided to make the opposite of what they just did.
What do you
And
think
then again
was
would make the opposite of that.
Yeah, what do you think was happening in the mid 90s as far as like indie rock goes? Cuz I mean like early 90s I can kind of picture, but like going into the late 90s like what was happening?
Well, I think the 90s were just a bunch of rock bands like scrambling to figure out what to do after like grunge died
Yeah.
and they were getting dropped from major labels. Because after Nirvana blew up, obviously a bunch of bands wanted another immediately like
Shiftless makes a
91,
good point
90.
about Britpop right there actually.
What do you say?
Britpop takes over
Yeah,
after
pretty.
grunge.
Yeah, that's a like. I think Britpop was just sort of what was. I mean, it was just a UK thing. It was like the antithesis of grunge.
Yeah, everything got like more
It used,
sophisticated.
but yeah, I mean, pretty much grunge had died out, and then you had a bunch of bands like Sonic Youth who were just not sure what they were gonna do, and then I think Dinosaur Jr. like broke up like mid or like late 90s. I mean, Built to Spill was doing whatever the hell they were doing in the late 90s, making like more sophisticated, like long form rock music.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like there's so many bands that either changed their sound or became irrelevant.
Yeah.
Like Pavement like kind of shifted to that more approachable just sort of basic indie rock sound. Um Pixies just fell off the face of the planet. Sonic Youth sort of changed their sound, but like those albums only became talked about from with Sonic Youth fans. Um I feel like Built to Spill or Dinosaur Jr. I mean, I might be getting them mixed up, but I feel like one of them continued to make well regarded like lo-fi noisy rock going into the 90s and into the 2000s, like still well critically acclaimed. I think that was may have been Dinosaur Jr., but it didn't
Well,
happen often.
Built to Spill went from making like, because in '94 Built to Spill made There's Nothing Wrong with Love, which is like short form, rock, kind of pop influenced songs, and then they became like this borderline, I wouldn't call it post rock at all, but just like, again, way more like sophisticated,
Mm-hmm.
if you could call it,
In
long form rock songs.
intellectual.
Yeah, Dinosaur Jr. sort of fizzled out. They
Hmm.
were still around, and they still, Feel the Pain was a big single in '94, but
Yeah, I that was my
uh,
first Dinosaur Jr. song. I was in like a rock band or something like that.
but the one after that, I think, is pretty much just like a J Mascis solo thing that he made in '97.
Hmm. Sponge. Get out of here,
And
Sponge.
and I was gonna say that Guided by Voices released Under the Bushes, Under the Stars, which is their most like, for a lo-fi band, they made pretty much a hi-fi album. Changing, everybody was trying to figure out what the hell they were gonna do in the later '90s,
Hmm.
and Pavement releases, like, I don't know, the something like Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, but for people that preferred Pavement, Sonic Youth, and Dinosaur Jr.
Yeah, and then and Smashing Pumpkins even shifted a little bit more into like the more gothic and dreamy stuff with Adore, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
which was not a critical success, I think. I might be wrong on that.
It
I
might
don't
be
think that
in it
album
might
did
be in
well.
retrospect, but I think maybe at the time it wasn't a big deal. I don't know. I reacted to one song from it so far, so I don't know that much about it, but anyway.
Yeah, that was a lot.
It's all
I
good.
think it's hard to look at a band, not look at what was going on in the music scene at all. You
Well,
can't like just isolate a band and be like,
yeah, and Pavement was
here's the album.
embroiled in it. You know, they were very much part of that scene, and were being influenced and influenced other people. So it's yeah, you can't really separate the two. But anyway, anything else on Wowee Zowee before we close it out?
Uh, a few quick things. I think people, this album has come to be appreciated way more, but people hated this when they came out. I mean, why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Um, but now it's like, oh, it's, again, it's one of the other best albums of the '90s. Like, you could pretty much make, uh, you could make like the excuse that any Pavement album is one of the best albums of the '90s. It's just sort of preference and what kind of sound you prefer.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. This is great. It's a weird, like I said before, it's an in between, like, transitioning album. And I'll quickly go through my favorite tracks: by Rattle by the Rush, Grounded, Best Friend's Arm, Grave Architecture, Fight This Generation. I don't know. Again, I loved most of this album.
Mm.
It doesn't really have any track I can point at and be like, I don't really like this.
It
Everything's good in moderation.
it I think a transitional album is a good description, but also it's like it feels like they like tossed everything out of their like supply and started fresh with Brighten the Corners. It's like the first two albums are their own thing, and then this is like some kind of weird vortex of insanity, and then you have like the Brighton and Terror that are a little bit more like uh, grounded and stable. So like this is like a really odd, like we've talked about, middle finger, throwing everything they have at the wall and seeing if it sticks. And it's a very unique album from in their discography in that way, as well as a transitional album, I think. Oh, there it is. Look at that.
So yeah, I sent the original art, and as well as the album that the reason why Malcolm picked it is because it was like that cover. And then I'm trying to find here's the Zappa thing. That little speech bubble is this phase one of Lumpy Gravy, which is weird Zappa stuff that I can't really touch on now. It'd be a whole nother discussion.
Someday I'll pick an inordinate amount of Zappa albums to listen to, and my brain will just melt in my head. Oh. Well, anyway, thank you guys for joining me. We only had a few people today, so we were able to wrap up pretty quickly. The next ones we'll be doing are Brighten the Corners. Hello, Mohammed. You just missed the whole thing. We're done. Brighten the Corners, Terror Twilight, and then the 2 EPs that I reacted to as well, which were Watery, Domestic, and Pacific Trim. And then at some point, I'll probably figure out like a good chunk of Malcolmist stuff to do, like solo albums, Jix, Silver Jews. I'll have to figure out a little batch of albums for that because I want to. I've heard. I reacted to what was it? Share the Red or something? Is that album name? I reacted to a song from a Stephen Malkmus album. Let me go look real quick. It's from Mirror
It's
Traffic.
yeah, I was gonna say the one from Mirror. I'm
Share the
surprised you
Red.
didn't listen to Stick Figures in Love, which I think is another great song off that album.
It was just whatever was recommended on the subreddit is what I did. But I liked that one, and it felt like this more mature, like still a well seasoned musician, but like the silliness had like worn off a little bit. I could be wrong on that. I don't know if you would say that Malcolmus's later stuff it wasn't as silly anymore out of Pavement. Is that true?
Yeah, he matured, but definitely that debut is again still like Pavement, weird Pavement stuff, but like more of like mid era, like Crooked Rain, Wowee Zowee, Brighten the Corners, Pavement stuff.
Hmm. But yeah, I need.
And I was also, sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good.
Also, but Steve Malkmus would also eventually end up covering a Can album in its entirety.
Which one?
So we're, I think it's I forget which one it is. I just know that he covered.
Oh
it.
yeah,
it's not.
It's a live album apparently.
Yeah, he just covered the whole thing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I think that was the one he was listening to a lot.
The cover art is glorious. Oh my gosh, look at that. I think that's it. I think that was also the one that he was listening to before he went to bed. Amazing. All right. Well, anyway, that's all we got for you guys. I hope you all enjoyed the discussion. Like I said, stay tuned for the next session that we'll do at some point in the future. These shouldn't be too hard to plan now because now that I'm live streaming it, I don't have to like edit it after the fact, and you guys have to wait for it to come out and whatnot. So, thank you, gentlemen. Shiftless boss, thank you for joining me. Say goodbye to the YouTube audience.
Goodbye.
Bye, YouTube audience.
Bye. Until next time, everyone. Have a good day. Godspeed.